I was too exhausted to cry. The hallway light flickered as I fumbled with my keys, my father's old briefcase weighing down one arm, the scent of antiseptic and faded cologne still clinging to my scrubs. It had been a long day, longer than most, spent at the hospital by his side, listening to his breath rattle between fractured sentences. The man who had once built Ford and Associates from the ground up now struggled to hold a pen steady, his signature a ghost of the bold strokes it had once been. I pushed the door open, kicking it shut behind me, the dull ache in my shoulders settling deeper. I didn't even bother turning on the lights as I dropped the briefcase by the couch and tossed my keys onto the kitchen counter. The apartment was silent, the kind of stillness that made it clear no one had been waiting for me to come home. It was something I had grown used to, something I had stopped questioning a long time ago. And then I saw it. The envelope sat on the counter, thick and heavy against the marble surface, nestled between a stack of unopened mail. My name was printed in sharp, impersonal letters. For a long moment, I just stared at it. I didn't need to open it to know what it was. The weight of it, the precise way it had been positioned, as if whoever left it knew exactly where my eyes would land first, told me everything. Still, my fingers moved on their own, tearing through the paper, peeling back the neatly folded documents inside. And there it was, spelled out in cold legal language, each paragraph a carefully structured end to 8 years of marriage. At the bottom of the last page, his signature. Ryan had already signed. No note. No explanation. Just the confirmation of what I had known for months, but hadn't wanted to acknowledge. The air in the apartment felt heavier. I ran my thumb over the ink, my breath steady, measured, forcing myself to feel nothing. It wasn't grief that settled in my chest. It was something sharper, something more insidious. I should have seen this coming. I should have known the late-night meetings weren't meetings at all. The careful way he had avoided my touch wasn't about stress. The sudden change in his cologne, the shirts I found crumpled in the back seat of his car, the way his wedding ring sat heavier on his hand as if even he had begged *N to resent its weight, every sign had been there, whispering the truth in a language I had refused to translate. It was almost laughable how long I had let myself believe in him. Ryan had never been the type to leave things unfinished. If he wanted out, he was already halfway gone before he even bothered to say the words. I set the papers down carefully, smoothing the creases, pressing my palms against the cool surface of the counter. A vibration buzzed against the wood. I turned my head, my phone screen lighting up with a notification from the bank. I almost dismissed it as another bill, until I saw the amount. My heart stilled. A transaction attempt. A large one. From my company account. To Ryan. Cold, hard clarity sliced through the numbness like a blade. The bastard had tried to move company assets into his name. A slow, burning heat crept up my spine, curling around my ribs, unraveling whatever restraint had been holding me together. My father's company, my company, wasn't his to take. Never his. I grabbed my phone, my fingers tightening around the edges. Before I could call the bank, another buzz. A message. From him. Ryan, it's done. You'll get what you need from the divorce. The company is mine now. Let it go. Let it go. I stared at the words, my grip tightening until my knuckles turned white. There was no hesitation in his message. No room for discussion. Ryan had never been one for sentimentality, but the cold finality of it, the sheer audacity, sent something sharp twisting through my stomach. I had spent the past year watching him slip away from me, listening to excuse after excuse about late nights, sudden business trips, whispered phone calls behind closed doors. And even when I knew, even when the truth had sunk into my bones like rot, I had told myself to wait. To be patient. To let him come to me. I had been such a fool. I wasn't waiting anymore. I clicked on the bank notification, my fingers flying over the screen as I pulled up my company's account details. The attempted transfer hadn't gone through, yet. The system had flagged it, frozen it pending authorization. He must have assumed I'd be too distracted, too emotionally drained, to notice before it was too late. Too weak to fight back. A humorless laugh bubbled up in my throat. Ryan had always underestimated me. I exited out of the bank app and went straight to my lawyer's contact. If he thought I was going to roll over and let him walk away with everything my father had built, everything I had worked for, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. But first, I picked up the divorce papers again, flipping through the pages with a slow, deliberate motion. If Ryan had been so sure of his victory, then I needed to see exactly what game he had been playing. The fine print revealed everything. He had structured the settlement in a way that left me with the bare minimum, just enough to make it seem fair on paper, but not enough to be considered a true equal split. If I had signed without looking, without questioning, I would have lost more than just my marriage. I would have lost everything. Anger curled hot and sharp in my stomach. I didn't believe in revenge. I had never been that kind of person. But as I stared down at the evidence of Ryan's betrayal, his deception woven into legal jargon, his signature proof of just how little he had thought of me, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't about heartbreak anymore. It wasn't even about the years I had wasted loving a man who had never really seen me. This was war. I straightened, rolling my shoulders back, the exhaustion in my limbs replaced by something steadier, something unshakable. Ryan thought he had won. He had no idea how wrong he was. The hospital air was thick with antiseptic and something heavier, something that had nothing to do with medicine and everything to do with the weight of waiting. My father's room was quiet except for the steady beep of the monitor beside him, the slow rise and fall of his chest beneath the thin hospital blanket. He had always been a force of nature, a man whose presence filled whatever space he occupied. But now he seemed smaller, his once strong hands lying motionless against the white sheets, his skin pale against the dim glow of the monitor. I sat beside him, my fingers curled around the edge of the chair, my mind still spinning with the events of the past hour. I had barely slept. I hadn't even changed out of my scrubs, too caught up in the cold realization of what Ryan had tried to do. I had spent years trusting a man who had been waiting for the perfect moment to take everything from me. And I had almost let him. Almost. My father stirred, his eyelids fluttering before he turned his head slightly, his gaze settling on me with quiet recognition. His voice was rough when he spoke. "You look like hell." A laugh, more breath than sound, escaped me. "Yeah, well, it's been that kind of night." His fingers twitched, and I reached out instinctively, wrapping my hand around his. The familiar calluses were still there, the roughness earned through years of building something out of nothing. This company wasn't just a business. It was his legacy. And Ryan had tried to take it while he lay here, too weak to fight back. I swallowed hard, the anger still simmering beneath my ribs. "Dad, I need to ask you something." He gave a slow nod, as if already sensing what was coming. "Did you?" I hesitated, then exhaled sharply. "Did you ever sign anything giving Ryan control of the company?" His expression didn't change, but I saw the flicker of something in his eyes. Not surprise. Not confusion. Confirmation. "No," he said, voice firm despite its weakness. "I didn't." Relief and rage crashed over me in equal measure. I tightened my grip on his hand, my pulse thudding in my ears. "Then he's lying. He tried to move company funds into his name." My father's lips pressed into a thin line. Even as weak as he was, there was still steel in his gaze, the same sharp determination that had built Ford and Associates from the ground up. "He thinks you won't fight him. He's wrong." Something like approval flickered across his face. Slowly, he shifted, reaching toward the small table beside his bed. A stack of paperwork sat there, neat and untouched except for a single envelope, already opened. He gestured toward it. "Take it." I picked it up, flipping it open, my eyes scanning the contents. And then my breath caught. The transfer of ownership. Signed. Dated. To me. I looked up sharply. "Dad." "I knew he'd try something," my father murmured. I wasn't sure when. But I saw it coming. His gaze hardened. "I just didn't think he'd be stupid enough to do it while I was still alive." Neither had I. The realization settled in my chest, heavy and suffocating. Ryan had counted on my father being too weak to oversee anything. He had assumed I would be too distracted, too emotionally drained to notice what he was doing. But he hadn't anticipated one thing. That my father had never trusted him in the first place. I exhaled slowly, my grip tightening on the document. This means he has no claim. No legal grounds. My father gave a slow nod. That company is yours now, Mary. Make sure he knows it. I stood, the weight of exhaustion momentarily forgotten, replaced by something sharper, something steadier. Ryan had thought he was dealing with the woman who had spent years making excuses for him. The woman who had ignored the late nights, the whispered phone calls, the slow unraveling of their marriage. But that woman didn't exist anymore. I leaned down, pressing a kiss to my father's forehead. Get some rest, Dad. I'll take care of this. His lips twitched into the ghost of a smile. I know you will. By the time I reached my car, my hands had stopped shaking. I sat behind the wheel, the hospital parking lot stretching out into the early morning haze, my breath steady, my mind clearer than it had been in weeks. I had the legal documents. I had the truth. But I couldn't go at this head-on. Not yet. Ryan needed to believe he had won. Letting him think he had control was the only way to catch him off guard. If I confronted him now, he would retreat, regroup, find another way to come after what wasn't his. But if he believed I was too broken to fight back, he'd get reckless. And I needed him reckless. I turned on my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for. Elliot Carter. I hesitated for only a second before hitting call. He answered on the second ring, his voice groggy but alert. Mary, I need your help. A pause. Then a sigh. What did Ryan do this time? I gave him the short version, Ryan's attempt to steal the company, the forged documents, the bank transfer that hadn't gone through. Elliot listened in silence, but I could practically hear the tension coiling in his shoulders. You need a strategy, he said finally. I already have one. He exhaled. Of course you do. Elliot had been my father's lawyer for years. He had also been the one person who had warned me, long before I was willing to listen, that Ryan wasn't as invested in our marriage as he was in his own ambitions. I had dismissed it back then. I had believed in my husband. I wasn't that naive anymore. Can you meet me? I asked. I need to make sure everything's airtight before I move forward. I'll be at your office in an hour. I ended the call, gripping the steering wheel, my pulse steady. Ryan thought he had already won. He had signed the divorce papers, moved out, and made his move while my father was still in the hospital. He thought I would crumble. He thought wrong. I pulled out of the parking lot, the city still waking up around me. The skyscrapers were bathed in the soft light of dawn, the streets still quiet, the world on the edge of something. So was I. By the time I reached Ford and Associates, the plan had already big *N to take shape in my mind. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to scream or demand explanations. I just needed to take back what was already mine. I walked through the glass doors of the office, nodding at the early employees who were trickling in. Some of them averted their gaze, others hesitated before offering stiff, polite greetings. I could already tell Ryan had been laying the groundwork, whispering whatever lies he thought would make his takeover easier. Let him. I reached my office, closed the door, and took a slow breath. The next few days were going to be calculated, careful. Ryan would think he was still in control. And then, when he least expected it, I would take everything back. The office had changed. Not in any obvious, tangible way, but in the way people moved, in the way their eyes slid past me as I walked through the halls, in the muted conversations that faded into silence whenever I came into view. I had been gone less than a week, long enough for Ryan to spread whatever narrative suited him best, long enough for people to start doubting where the true power lay. Good. Let them underestimate me. Let them believe that I was distracted, grieving, too emotionally drained to put up a fight. Let them side with Ryan for now, believing his version of events. Because when this was over, when the truth came to light, I would know exactly who had stood with him. And I would make sure they had no place in this company when I was done. I stepped into my office and locked the door behind me. The moment I was alone, I exhaled, letting the tension settle into something colder, something sharper. Elliot was waiting for me, seated on the other side of my desk, his posture relaxed, but his eyes focused. He had always been good at hiding his emotions, but there was something else beneath his usual calm, something close to anger. I took my seat across from him, setting the folder down between us. Tell me everything. Elliot flipped it open, skimming the first page before speaking. Ryan has been planning this for months. Maybe longer. The attempted transfer at the bank was just one piece. He's also been trying to renegotiate certain contracts, shifting key accounts under his management instead of yours. Small moves, nothing that would raise alarms immediately, but over time, it would have given him full control. A slow, burning anger spread through me. And no one thought to warn me? Elliot's expression darkened. I think people assumed you already knew. Or that you didn't care. I let out a humorless laugh. Of course. Ryan had always been good at controlling the narrative, at making sure people saw what he wanted them to see. And I had given him too much room, too much trust, too much of myself. No more. I flipped through the documents, my gaze hardening as I took in the details. The numbers didn't lie. Ryan had already siphoned company funds into personal accounts under the guise of business expenses. He had positioned himself as the natural successor, using my father's illness to plant doubt in the minds of our investors. And worst of all, he had been negotiating a potential buyout behind my back. I looked up sharply. He's selling. Elliot nodded. Or trying to. He's been in talks with Monroe Holdings. If they agree to his terms, he walks away with enough money to start over, and you lose everything. The air in the room grew heavier, the weight of his words settling over me like lead. Ryan wasn't just trying to steal the company, he was planning to sell it out from under me. To erase my father's legacy and walk away with a payout large enough to bury his mistakes. Not happening, I said flatly. Elliot studied me for a moment, then gave a small nod. I didn't think so. I leaned back, tapping my fingers against the desk as the beginnings of a plan took shape. If Ryan wanted to play this game, I would let him. But I wouldn't confront him outright. Not yet. I needed more leverage, something irrefutable that would dismantle his entire strategy. I met Elliot's gaze. I need access to every contract he's touched in the past year. Every financial record, every email, every single document with his name on it. Elliot's lips quirked. Already ahead of you. He slid another folder toward me. It's all here. I flipped it open, scanning the pages. The evidence was damning. Enough to destroy Ryan's reputation, enough to ensure that if he walked away from this, he would do so with nothing. Still, I needed more. He thinks he still has control, I murmured, half to myself. He thinks I'm too tired to fight back. Elliot studied me for a long moment before speaking. What's your next move? I smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. I let him think he's winning. The rest of the day passed in a blur of careful planning. Calls were made, documents were copied, meetings were arranged behind closed doors. I moved quietly, strategically, avoiding direct confrontation while laying the groundwork for what was coming. By the time the office had emptied for the night, I was still seated behind my desk, sifting through years of decisions that had led me to this moment. The anger had settled into something colder, something more precise. Ryan had underestimated me. By the time he realized his mistake, it would be too late. The next morning, I played my role perfectly. I arrived later than usual, dressed in soft grays instead of my usual sharp blacks, my makeup minimal, my posture carrying just the right amount of exhaustion. I let the whispers follow me down the hallways, let the sympathetic glances wash over me as I passed by. Let them think I was losing. It was almost laughable how easily they bought it. How easily they believed that grief had made me blind. Ryan had done his job well, ensuring that doubt had already rooted itself deep within the company. He was waiting for me when I stepped into my office. Leaning against my desk, his arms crossed, a smug smile curving his lips. Rough few days? I met his gaze, my own carefully blank. You could say that. He studied me for a moment, then let out a slow exhale, shaking his head in mock sympathy. Mary, I don't want to make this harder than it needs to be. I let out a soft, tired laugh. Really? Because it looks like you've gone out of your way to do exactly that. He tilted his head slightly, as if considering his next words carefully. Look, I know this isn't what you wanted. But this company, needs someone who can handle the pressure. Someone who isn't distracted. I almost smiled. He thought I was distracted. He thought I was tired, overwhelmed, too drained to fight back. Good. I don't want to fight with you, he continued, his voice dripping with forced sincerity. You'll be taken care of in the divorce. Just let me handle the company, and we can both move on. I let the silence stretch between us, pretending to weigh his words. Then, finally, I nodded. All right. Surprise flickered across his face. All right? I'll step back, I said softly, keeping my expression carefully composed. You clearly have everything under control. I don't have the energy to keep fighting you. Ryan's posture relaxed slightly, his confidence returning. I'm glad you see it that way. I offered him a small, weary smile. I just have one condition. His brows lifted slightly. And what's that? I leaned forward, resting my hands on the desk between us. My voice was soft when I spoke, almost gentle. I want to be there when you finalize the sale. His reaction was subtle, just the briefest flicker of hesitation, the way his jaw tightened ever so slightly. But it was enough. He didn't want me anywhere near that meeting. I smiled again, tilting my head slightly. If you want me to step back, I need to see it for myself. I need to know this company is in good hands. Ryan hesitated. I saw the wheels turning in his mind, calculating the risk. If he refused, it would look suspicious. If he agreed, he assumed I would be too emotionally compromised to interfere. After a moment, he gave a slow nod. All right. I straightened, my smile never faltering. Perfect. By the time he walked out of my office, still believing he had won, I knew with absolute certainty. Ryan Ford's days at this company were numbered. I kept the act going for the next few days. Ryan moved through the office like a king surveying his kingdom, shoulders squared, eyes filled with the certainty of someone who believed his victory was already sealed. He had never been subtle about his arrogance, but now it was worse, laced with something almost celebratory. He spoke a little louder, laughed a little easier, as if he had already rewritten history to place himself as the sole architect of Ford and Associates. I let him have it. I walked slower, spoke softer, allowed hesitation to creep into my words when asked about the company's future. I let people believe I was slipping away, that grief and exhaustion had hollowed me out enough to make stepping aside the only rational decision. I made sure Ryan saw every moment of it. The day before the meeting with Monroe Holdings, I caught his reflection in the glass of the conference room as he stood at the far end of the hall, watching me. He thought I didn't notice. But I did. I had always known how to play this game better than him. Ryan thrived on confidence, on the illusion of complete control. He didn't believe in caution. That was his weakness. The moment he thought he had won, he would take his eyes off the board, convinced there was nothing left to protect. That's when I would strike. The morning of the meeting, I arrived before the rest of the office, slipping into my chair with a folder of documents that would shift everything the moment I chose to reveal them. The past week had been spent gathering every piece of leverage I needed, emails, bank statements, records of conversations he thought had been erased. I had it all. And when the moment came, there would be no room for negotiation. At exactly 9:30, Ryan walked in, dressed in his best navy suit, tie perfectly in place, the picture of a man on the verge of sealing the most important deal of his life. He gave me a tight smile. Ready? I let out a slow breath. As I'll ever be. He thought it was nerves. Good. The conference room was already filled with key players by the time we arrived. The representatives from Monroe Holdings sat on one side of the table, polished and professional, their expressions giving nothing away. Ryan took the seat at the head of the table, a calculated move to assert dominance, but no one paid it any attention. I took the seat directly across from him, keeping my gaze downcast as I opened my folder, flipping through the first few pages with a slow, deliberate motion. The meeting started as expected. Ryan launched into his pitch, weaving a narrative that framed him as the sole decision-maker, the force that had driven Ford and Associates toward its current position. He spoke in carefully crafted phrases, emphasizing his leadership, his strategic vision, his role in ensuring the company's future success. He barely mentioned my father. He didn't mention me at all. I kept my expression neutral, hands folded on the table, allowing him to sink deeper into his own arrogance. Then Monroe Holdings' lead negotiator, a sharp-eyed woman named Evelyn Carter, leaned forward, tapping a single manicured finger against the table. And what does Mary think? The shift in the room was subtle, but immediate. Ryan stilled for a fraction of a second, his posture tightening. He hadn't expected them to ask. He had assumed they would accept his version of events without question. I glanced up slowly, meeting Evelyn's gaze with a carefully measured expression. I think Ryan has worked very hard to present his vision for this company. Ryan exhaled, relief flickering across his face. He thought I was giving him my blessing. I wasn't. I reached for the folder, turning it toward Evelyn. But I also think there's some information you should see before we proceed. Ryan's expression faltered. Mary. I slid the documents across the table. Evelyn took her time flipping through them, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded toward her associate, who did the same. Silence stretched. Then she looked up, fixing Ryan with a gaze so sharp it could have sliced through glass. Ryan, can you explain this? His face drained of color. What, exactly, am I supposed to be explaining? Evelyn placed a single page in front of him, tapping the bolded figures at the top. The discrepancy in these numbers. The unapproved transfers. The way you've positioned assets in your name that were never legally yours. She tilted her head slightly. That seems like something worth addressing. A muscle in Ryan's jaw twitched. This is completely out of context. Elliot spoke for the first time. It really isn't. Ryan's head snapped toward him. He hadn't expected Elliot to be here. Another miscalculation. Elliot clasped his hands in front of him, his voice smooth, calm. You positioned yourself as the sole authority over this company, despite having no legal claim to it. You attempted to reroute funds in a way that directly contradicts corporate governance policies. And let's not forget the fraudulent signatures. He leaned back slightly. All of which are outlined right there, in black and white. Ryan's breathing had gone shallow. He looked from me to Elliot to Evelyn, searching for something, an escape, a way to twist the situation in his favor. He found nothing. I watched the realization sink in. He was out of moves. His hands curled into fists against the table. You set me up. I tilted my head. No, Ryan. You set yourself up. Silence. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. We don't do business with people who operate like this. The deal is off. Ryan flinched as if struck. Wait. You should be more concerned about what happens next, I cut in, my voice soft but lethal. Because this is only the beginning. For the first time, Ryan looked afraid. And he should have been. I stood, gathering my papers with slow precision. You're done here, Ryan. His lips parted, but no words came out. There was nothing left to say. Security was waiting for him when we stepped out of the conference room. I had made the call an hour before the meeting, ensuring there would be no opportunity for him to manipulate, plead, or fight his way out of the situation. 2 uniformed officers flanked him as he stood there, motionless, caught between disbelief and rage. I walked past him without a second glance. By the time I reached my office, the tension had bled from my shoulders. I exhaled slowly, pressing my hands against the cool surface of my desk. It was over. I had won. The fallout came swiftly. Ryan was removed from the company within 24 hours. Investors were informed, employees briefed, contracts reinforced to ensure that no one would ever attempt the same power grab again. I spent the next few weeks restructuring, eliminating those who had sided with Ryan, solidifying my position as the rightful head of Ford and Associates. By the end of the month, everything he had built for himself, every lie, every manipulation was gone. He had underestimated me. And now he had nothing. The night after the final legal settlement was signed, I sat in my father's old office, the city skyline stretching beyond the windows, the weight of everything finally settling. My phone buzzed. A message. From Ryan. You never loved me, did you? I stared at the screen, at the words laced with accusation, with bitterness, with the remnants of a man who had lost everything and was looking for someone to blame. I let the message sit there for a moment. Then I deleted it. Ryan was my past. And I was done looking back. The silence in my office felt different now. Before, it had been heavy, thick with uncertainty, with the weight of battles yet to be fought. Now, it was something else entirely. Something cleaner. Something mine. I leaned back in my chair, fingers grazing the smooth wood of my desk. My father's nameplate still sat there, a silent reminder of where this all began. But it was my name that mattered now. My company. My future. Ryan was gone. His office had been emptied within hours of his removal, every trace of his presence erased as if he had never set foot here at all. It was almost laughable how quickly people had distanced themselves from him, how eager they were to align with me now that the power had shifted. The same employees who had once whispered behind my back now offered tight smiles, nervous greetings, eager assurances of their loyalty. I let them grovel. I let them wonder if I was the kind of leader who forgave easily. I wasn't. But I had bigger things to focus on. The company was stable again, but stability wasn't enough. I wanted growth. I wanted expansion. I wanted to take everything Ryan had tried to steal and make it into something even he wouldn't have been able to dream of. Elliot knocked once before stepping inside, a stack of documents in hand. He didn't bother with pleasantries, he never did. Instead, he set the papers down in front of me and got straight to the point. Ryan's officially withdrawn his lawsuit. I raised a brow. That fast? He didn't have a choice. Elliot smirked. After the fraud charges, he realized dragging this out in court would only make things worse for him. I picked up the top document, scanning the legal jargon that boiled down to a single truth. Ryan had lost. Completely. No settlement, I murmured, more to myself than to Elliot. No compensation. Just nothing. Elliot sat across from me, crossing one leg over the other. That's what happens when you gamble everything and lose. I exhaled slowly, setting the papers aside. It should have felt satisfying, watching him crumble under the weight of his own arrogance. But in truth, I felt nothing at all. Maybe that was the real victory. Monroe Holdings wants to meet again, Elliot said after a beat. They're still interested in working with us as long as Ryan isn't in the picture. I tapped my nails against the desk, considering. Monroe had been Ryan's idea, his desperate attempt to cash out before his lies caught up to him. I didn't need them. But I wasn't opposed to hearing what they had to offer on my terms this time. Set the meeting, I said. Elliot nodded, but he didn't move right away. His gaze lingered on me, thoughtful, assessing. You did it, you know. I met his eyes. Did what? Proved everyone wrong. He leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on his knees. Your father always knew you were the only one who could handle this company. But the rest of them? They doubted you. Ryan doubted you. And now look at you. I held his gaze, searching for some hint of what he wasn't saying. Elliot had always been a step ahead, always thinking 3 moves forward. What's your point? I asked. My point, he said, is that now you have something even more valuable than this company. I arched a brow. And what's that? Elliot's smirk was knowing. Fear. I didn't respond right away. But I understood. Ryan had underestimated me. The board had underestimated me. Even the employees who had watched my father build this company from nothing had doubted my ability to lead. But now? Now, they knew better. Now, they feared me. And fear was a powerful thing. Monroe isn't the only offer on the table, Elliot continued. There's interest from international firms. Investors who see what you've done and want in before the next big expansion. I glanced down at the paperwork, the neatly typed offers, the numbers that made even the Monroe deal look small. I had spent so long fighting to protect what was mine that I hadn't allowed myself to think about what came next. But now I could. I wasn't just here to survive. I was here to build something that would outlast everyone who had ever tried to take it from me. I flipped through the files, my pulse steady. Set the meetings, I said again. Elliot gave a slow nod. Consider it done. He stood, smoothing out his jacket before heading for the door. But just before he stepped out, he paused. Ryan's leaving the city, he said. Got word he's trying to start over somewhere else. I didn't ask where. I didn't care. He's not our problem anymore, I said simply. Elliot hesitated, then nodded. No, he's not. The door shut behind him, leaving me alone with the quiet hum of the city beyond my windows. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. Not because I had one, but because I was finally free. The city stretched beyond my office windows, the skyline bathed in golden light as the sun dipped below the horizon. The view had always been my father's favorite part of this building, the one thing he had never changed even as Ford and Associates grew. He used to say that watching the city at sunset reminded him why he worked so hard, that power meant nothing if you weren't building something that would last. I had spent so long fighting for this company that I hadn't stopped to think about what I wanted to build. Until now. The Monroe deal had gone through, but not the way Ryan had planned. They had come back to the table cautiously, wary after the disaster of his attempted takeover, but I had made it clear from the start, I wasn't interested in handing over control. If they wanted a partnership, they would do it on my terms. And they had agreed. It was the first of many. Elliot had been right. Ryan's downfall had done more than secure my place at the top, it had shifted the way people saw me. I wasn't just the woman who had inherited her father's company. I wasn't the grieving daughter, the betrayed wife. I was something else now. Something dangerous. The first time I had walked into a boardroom after Ryan's removal, I had seen it in their eyes. The wariness. The hesitation. The realization that they didn't know what I was capable of, only that I had destroyed the man who had tried to take what was mine. Fear. It was a powerful thing. And I wielded it well. There was a knock at my office door. I didn't look away from the window. Come in. Elliot stepped inside, his usual stack of files in hand. He set them down with a quiet thud, then leaned against the chair across from my desk. It's done. I turned to face him. What is? The last of Ryan's supporters have been removed. Anyone who was feeding him information or backing his attempt to take over is gone. I nodded once. It was inevitable. There was no place for disloyalty in this company. Elliot tilted his head slightly, studying me. You don't even look surprised. I'm not. He let out a low chuckle. You really have changed, haven't you? I didn't answer right away. But I knew the truth. Yes, I had changed. I had spent years believing that my role was to support, to compromise, to trust. I had spent years giving Ryan the benefit of the doubt, making excuses for his distance, his betrayals. And when the truth had finally come crashing down, I had burned the entire foundation to the ground rather than let him take what wasn't his. Now, there was nothing left to take. Only what I had built for myself. What's next? Elliot asked. I sat back, exhaling slowly. Expansion. His lips quirked. I thought you might say that. I had been reviewing the offers for weeks. International firms wanted in. Investors were lining up. Ford and Associates wasn't just recovering from Ryan's attempted coup, it was growing. Faster, stronger than ever before. I picked up one of the folders Elliot had brought in, flipping it open. A European firm, one of the biggest in the industry, was proposing a merger. Not a takeover, an alliance. Tell me, I said, glancing up at him. Do you think my father would have done this? Elliot considered the question. Your father built this company from nothing. He was careful. Protective. He never rushed into deals unless he knew they would strengthen his position. He leaned forward slightly. But you're not your father. No, I wasn't. My father had spent his life protecting what he built. I would spend mine making sure no one could ever take it away. I closed the folder. Set the meeting. Elliot nodded, standing. I'll make the call. He hesitated for just a second before turning toward the door. I caught it. What? He glanced back at me, an almost amused expression crossing his face. Nothing, Elliot. He sighed, shaking his head. It's just. I knew you had this in you. I just don't think Ryan ever thought you'd be capable of it. I met his gaze. Ryan never really knew me. Elliot gave a small smile. No, he didn't. He left without another word. I sat there for a long time, staring at the documents in front of me, at the city beyond my windows. I had won. I had everything I had fought for. And yet, There was a part of me that still felt like I was standing at the beginning of something, rather than the end. Maybe that was the truth of power. It wasn't about winning. It was about never letting anyone take it from you again. The sun had fully set by the time I left the office. The city was alive with movement, the streets buzzing with energy. I slipped into my car, the leather cooled beneath my hands as I pulled onto the road. My phone buzzed. A message. Ryan. I almost ignored it. But something in me wanted to see. I tapped the screen. You won. Hope it was worth it. I stared at the words for a long moment. Then, without hesitation, I deleted the message. Ryan was my past. And I had no interest in looking back.